Well, we don't even know. We're not clear at all when the synagogue originated. The word synagogue is a word that is a Greek word, which actually means bringing bringing people together in a way, of convening. Um, the traditional view is that the synagogue actually originated at the time of the exile, after the destruction of the first temple. Why? Because you had all these Jews who prayed, and obviously a good number of the Psalms could have been written at that time. At least that's one of the theories. And there was a place where they would, lament and speak about the temple that was destroyed and try to reestablish some kind of community prayer. And so there's a theory that says that the synagogue actually began with the exile, the destruction of the temple, around 586. That's not the more prevalent view. In fact, there's good reason to assume that it actually started when you had 24 ma'amadot, which were actually places where the community that sent whatever was the sacrifice to the temple in Jerusalem in the area, that they would unite, and at the time when their sacrifices were there, that they would then actually read prayers and so forth. But then the question, of course, is where did you get in the synagogue the idea of reading the Torah, for example? We know for a fact that not only did they read the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, they also read what is called the Haftorah, which is the completion of the reading of the Torah, which is from the prophetic writings. And the prophetic writings, in large measure, were chosen largely, there's a lot of theories about that too, were chosen largely to fit into what the reading of the Torah is. So, for example, if you're going to read from the 5 books of Moses, a section on leprosy, let's say, well, they'll find some place in the historical books or the prophetic books that deals with leprosy. Or if it deals with creation, like in the first chapter of Genesis, they'll find some chapter from the prophets that deal with creation. So that now one of the theories there is because during certain persecutions, they were not allowed to read the Torah. And so therefore what they did is they actually read portions of the prophetic writings that would remind them of the Torah or things like that. So but now, traditionally, a synagogue goes under 3 names. It's called a Beit HaKnesset, which means a house of gathering, where the community can gather to actually deal with its business, to discuss things, to have a sense of community, to have a sense of fellowship, to have a sense of how do we help one another, to have a sense of actually dealing with what are the needs of the community, and so that it becomes sort of a focus of community integration. So that's Beit HaKnesset. Then it's called a Beit HaTfilah, which is a house of prayer. And so in this sense, I think it's very interesting that where did prayer come from? I mean, where do you have really prayer? Look at the Psalms. Is there anything comparable to the Psalms in the ancient world? Not much at all. And so what you had was the Psalms. You had the pouring out of one's heart in the presence of God. And so it became also a house of prayer. And gradually what was developed was a liturgy. In other words, there was an order to prayer. In fact, the word Seder, which we use for the Passover, means order. That there's a particular kind of order to prayer, so that it's called a Beit HaKnesset, a house of gathering, a house of prayer, and then it's called a Beis HaMidrash, a house of study. And if it doesn't have those 3 elements, it's really not a synagogue. Now, to actually want to have a place to pray, you can pray anywhere, in any situation. And in some cases, they want to pray in a place where there's a Torah, because on Mondays and Thursdays, you want to read the Torah, and also on Saturday, you read the Torah. So you have What happens is that the five books of Moses is divided so that there's a portion for each week. And then there's a prophetic portion that goes with it for each week. Then there's a portion for holidays. And then for some festivals, you read then the scrolls like Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Ruth, etc. And so what you've got is a built-in structure of learning. That's the thing that's most important to keep in mind in a synagogue. I think that learning was so foundational in Judaism that even girls were taught how to read it. Because if you're going to go to a synagogue and you're going to hear the Torah, and in other words, you had a prayer book in front of you, you had to be able to read it. And in a sense, now they didn't study Talmud or anything like that, but from the very beginning, and you see, it's interesting because the first years of life, it's the mother really that cares for the child. And if the mother had some learning, if the mother had some understanding, if the mother had some education, it became that much easier to impart it to the child. It isn't that she just, took care of a child without any education, because, in Greek society, at the age of 6, they returned to the father, and then that was it. They had very little contact with their mother. I mean, so a synagogue is a place of gathering, a place of prayer, and a place of study. So that if you were to go into the average synagogue, you will find that in most synagogues they have a library, and they have the basic text there. But study, in my opinion, is the essential element in Jewish existence. And then you also have involvement in what do you do with that study. And so the synagogue was also involved in projects in terms of how can we take what we've learned and do something with it. So I think that you go around the country even now today, most synagogues have a social action committee or an educational committee and so on. They're very much involved in the community. I think one of the things that we can say is that wherever Jews have been, they've always done their best to build up the community. For example, establish hospitals, establish museums, establish charitable institutions. All this is part and parcel of the synagogues doing these three functions.